On behalf of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University, I would like to welcome you to this event on how can we heal communities with love. My name is Tyler Vanderweel. I'm the director of the Human Flourishing Program and the Loeb Professor of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I will make a few brief remarks on the Human Flourishing Program and on our Love and Flourishing project, and then go on to introduce our moderator for this evening, who will subsequently begin the introductions of our wonderful panelists. The Human Flourishing Program was founded in 2016 to study and promote human flourishing. And as we've come back to this question as to how to promote human flourishing, again and again, we return to a theme neglected in much university discourse, and that theme is love. Love of neighbor, even love of enemy, appears consistently across the world religious traditions as an important means to flourishing, as often the foundation of our ethics. That notion of love of neighbor is prominent in the Christian, Muslim, Jewish traditions and has powerful analogs in Hindu and Buddhist traditions as well. And yet, we see this matter discussed infrequently in university contexts. At the Human Flourishing Program, we are trying to change that. We've done empirical work on the importance of love within parenting, within friendship, within forgiveness, within sibling relationships. We've also been looking at how to measure love within parenting, within friendships, love of stranger, love of neighbor, even love of enemy. And we hope to launch a more rigorous study of love. But we hope not only to study love, but to also promote love. One of our more ambitious projects to date in that regard is trying to launch a global forgiveness movement. Some of our prior work examined a forgiveness workbook, which I believe you all have little pamphlets of information on. But we evaluated this in a randomized trial in 4,500 participants in 5 relatively high-conflict countries: Colombia, South Africa, Ukraine, Indonesia, and Hong Kong, and found effects of this forgiveness workbook on promoting forgiveness, a restoration of love, but also on improving depression, improving anxiety, improving hope, improving flourishing. And so we are now hoping that by disseminating these forgiveness resources, we can help restore love within communities. Because we need love not just individually, but within our communities as well, within schools and workplaces, within clinics and mental health care, and for those within our communities without a home. And our panelists at this afternoon's discussion have done extraordinary work in each of these various contexts. And so we're delighted to be able to have this discussion together. Our moderator this afternoon will be Reverend John Finley, who is a graduate of both the college and the Divinity School. While he was a student, he also started what has now become the Harvard Square Homeless Shelter. He is now co-founder and head of the Epiphany School, which is an independent school, tuition-free, that serves economically disadvantaged youth who have experienced abuse and neglect. So he too has contributed enormously to bringing love to communities. He serves also as an Episcopal priest and is our moderator this afternoon. So with that, I will hand things over to John. Let's welcome John and our panelists.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you for the important work that your center is doing. I think it's the topic of love is rich and deep, but also, I think, neglected. In terms of introductions, I could tell you all the books that everybody's written and how amazing they are, but we know each other reasonably well, so I'm going to actually ask people to introduce each other, and I'm going to start by introducing the Reverend Liz Walker. Liz, as many of you know, is a television news broadcaster and had an amazing career in that work, and then left that and answered a call to become first to go to Harvard Divinity School and then to become a minister. Came to serve in the Roxbury section of Boston, then had a traumatic loss in her parish and her church, and I think allowed herself to grow and question what was going on and how could that become a healing thing, and has now created a program called Can We Talk, We have a branch of it at my church in Dorchester. It's a beautiful, beautiful program. Liz is a beautiful person on the outside, but she's a beautiful person on the inside. And it's an honor to know you and love you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Liz Walker.
Thank you. I'm honored to be back on this campus and to be in this place. And I am so honored to say the name Harvard University. I just want to say that. That's weird. Jim O'Connell, I first met in the middle of the night, one cold winter night, when the mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, I think was the mayor of Boston then, wanted a bunch of us to go on a tour of the streets and to see what life was like on the streets. And the issue was the unhoused, but I had never met a person like Jim who works directly with unhoused people with such passion and such care and such humility. It was, and I mean this, I mean no disrespect, it was like walking with Jesus as far as I was concerned, because of just the way you approach people with such dignity. So I am honored to introduce to you the head of the Boston Healthcare for the Unhoused, I'm probably not correctly saying it, Jim O'Connell.
Woo.
So Liz, that's the best introduction I've ever had. Thank you so much, okay? And I get the honor of introducing Bryan Stevenson, who I'm a little bit intimidated sitting next to. But I had the privilege with several of the folks here to go down and visit Bryan in Montgomery, where he's head of the Equal Justice Institute, and I don't think needs any introduction to any of you. His book, Just Mercy, captivated all of us and then became a movie. But I decided after that journey, all of us should go down to see the Legacy Museum and what Bryan has transformed in Montgomery that calls us to understand what the history is all about. So, needs no introduction, but a hero to me, Bryan.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I get the privilege of representing this person to my right, who is Father Greg Boyle. He is a priest. He's an amazing writer, and his status as one of America's great writers is not something you should overlook. He wrote a life-changing book called Tattoo of the Heart that talks about his extraordinary work. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles and has been the source of tremendous inspiration to many of us who work with people who have been impacted by our criminal legal system, people who have been jailed or prisoned, people who have been pulled into the gang culture that has created so much violence and havoc. But the important thing I want to say about G is that he is a free man. And there aren't many free people in the world, but he's a free man because his work with the condemned and the poor and the incarcerated has allowed him to tear down all of the barriers that often keep us from loving one another, seeing one another. And when you don't have those barriers, you get to move through life with a kind of freedom, a kind of hope, a kind of joy that is really rare. And Father Greg Boyle is one of those special people moving through the world with the beauty and the joy of a free person. And for that, I'm really grateful to call him a friend and colleague.
Thank you. So I have the task of introducing to you one of the great human beings I know, Bob Goff, who is a lawyer and has founded Love Does, which is a nonprofit that kind of announces to the world a whole other way of living and proceeding. He has written a lot of books, and for me, he's like the a force of nature, but he's like the finger pointing to the moon, as the Zen saying goes. He points to the moon. He always points beyond himself to the God who loves us without measure and without regret. The people will say that none of us will live forever, but we can live in the forever. And this is a man who lives exactly, precisely here and now in the forever. And I think that's quite remarkable. So I present to you Bob Goff.
Thank you. Thank you. And I am delighted to introduce the Reverend Becca Stevens, who is constantly working on something. She is knitting a king-size blanket right now. But she's a creator constantly. Wherever she goes, she creates. And she reminds us that God never compares what he creates. He just creates. She uses wit and wisdom and 2 doses of sass to everything that she does. She loves God, but she loves people in unique and authentic ways. And she's that bright light that we continue to row towards. I present Becca Stevens.
Becca, you don't have to introduce anyone. You're safe. You can think about a place like Harvard. There's the university, which is where you're developing your skills, your organic chemistry, your whatever you're learning. But there's also the college where hopefully you're learning some life lessons and sort of how to live a life. And my first question is going to go to you, Bryan, about, could you make the pitch for committing yourself to love, right? And it's a tough pitch, right? Because it's better to go to Morgan Stanley or Cravath or something, right? But that's not the path that you took. And while you think about your answer, I was thinking about something that you wrote, Bob. And you said, the thing, if something can't be solved with duct tape, you just use more duct tape, right? And then you go on to say, if it can't be solved with love, just apply more love, right? So, Bryan, make the pitch to the room that, we need to devote ourselves to loving each other.
Well, I think it's the thing that will help us survive, help us experience a kind of relationship to who we are and the people around us. It's the thing that I believe can lift us up, but not only that, lift other people up. I mean, what comes to mind is actually I went to Harvard Law School, and I was a philosophy major in college. Hadn't thought about what came after college. I started my education in a colored school in the South, and lawyers came into the community to make them open up the public schools. That's how I got to high school. That's how I got to college. And during my senior year, somebody said, I hope you know that nobody's going to pay you to philosophize when you graduate from college. And I panicked, and I started looking into all kinds of things, and I ended up at law school because I realized you don't need to know anything to go to law school. And on my first day here at Harvard, I remember it's coming back to me, they put us in small groups, and they asked a student group leader to take you someplace to make you feel comfortable. And I was in this group with 13 other students. And the student group leader just asked, why are you in law school? And my classmates all started talking about how they were the son or the daughter or the nephew or the niece or the grandson or the granddaughter of a lawyer. And after the 5th one, I started to squirm because I realized I wasn't related to any lawyers. And they kept all talking about their family connections. And after the 8th student talked about their familial connection, I realized something I'd never realized before. And what I realized was that not only was I not related to a lawyer, I realized I'd never even met a lawyer. And by the time they got to me, I felt so diminished, I didn't know how to answer the question. I told a joke, I just didn't talk honestly. And I called my mom right after that, and I said, Mom, I don't think I belong at Harvard. And my mother said, what's wrong with you? You belong wherever you go. You're the smartest person in the world. You can do anything you want to do. And then she said, now you need to tell those people why you're really there and remind them of the love. And I embraced everything she said, but I didn't think I could organize those students and have a second meeting. That would be too awkward. 2 weeks into it, I still felt off. And I ultimately did what she said, and I found as many of those students, and I said, look, I didn't talk honestly on the first day, and I need to tell you why I'm here. And what I told them is that my great-grandfather was enslaved in Caroline County, Virginia, in the 1850s. And even though it was against the law for enslaved people to learn to read or write, he risked his life to learn to read because he had a hope of freedom, a love of freedom, something he had never experienced that was so powerful, he was willing to risk his life. And he learned to read or write. He didn't know a civil war was coming in the 1860s, but after emancipation, he wanted to share that love of freedom with everybody, and he would read the newspaper to formerly enslaved people in that community who didn't know how to read, and he wanted them to know what was going on. And my grandmother told me she loved that her father knew how to read, and when he started reading, she would get near him as he was reading the newspaper and push their siblings aside and wrap her arms around his leg, and she just loved that he could read, and she would grab him tightly when he started reading because she wanted to learn to read, and she thought you learned to read by touching somebody while they read. He figured out what she was doing. He says, "No, Victoria, that's not how you learn to read. I'm going to teach you how to read." And my grandmother worked as a domestic her whole life, but she was a reader. She insisted that her 10 children be readers. She had a love of reading. And I'd go visit her, and sometimes when I'd get there, she'd come out on the porch with a stack of books, and she'd make me read something before she would let me into the house. I grew up in a poor, racially segregated community. And I didn't see a lot of hope outside the door. People had outhouses and not running water. But my mom went into debt when we were kids, and she bought us the World Book Encyclopedia. And we had those books in our house. And I didn't see a lot of hope outside, but I could see it in those books. I read about the lawyers in those books, and I can't claim that I always understood it, because when you're 10, and you go outside at Christmas and your friends are like, "Well, I got a bicycle, I got a baseball, I got a basketball." I'd have to say, "Well, I got volume G of the World Book Encyclopedia." But when I told my classmates at Harvard on my first day here, I said, I'm here because I've been lifted up by generations of loving people. An enslaved great-grandfather who loved freedom so powerfully that he risked his life. A grandmother who loved the possibility of a better future so desperately that she insisted that her children read. A mother who loved so intensely that she was willing to go into debt. And then all of a sudden, I didn't feel diminished at Harvard. I didn't feel like I didn't have the things I needed. All of a sudden, I felt like I had something that maybe my classmates didn't have. I started to feel like I could do things that maybe they won't be able to do. Why? Because I felt lifted up by hope and love. And the invitation I would offer is that when we embrace love and we embrace the power of love to lift up the forgotten and the marginalized and the excluded, when we embrace the power of love to take down the barriers that sometimes hold people back, you begin to realize there's nothing you cannot do. And coming back here, all these years later, sitting on this stage with all of these amazing people, and remembering that moment of fear and doubt that was overcome by remembering the legacy of love, that's the thing that comes to mind when you ask me about why love is something we should embrace.
That's a great answer. Bryan, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to ask you, Liz, now also the same thing about love. And while you think, I was just going to say that, when I look at your career and your success as a journalist and so forth, and then this whole switch, you remind me of something that Greg, you wrote once, and the question to us, like, why don't we take seriously what God takes seriously, right? And, the work that you've been doing is not making you rich. It's not, whatever.
Yeah.
Buy her new book. It all goes to help the program. It doesn't go to her.
It doesn't go to me.
Yeah.
What Bryan just said just
Yeah.
triggered a memory for me. When I was a little girl in Little Rock, Arkansas, my mother died when I was born. My father was a preacher, and he would take me and my brother everywhere he went. And he took us to, in 1954, 55, whatever, to the Arch Street Baptist Church where Martin Luther King preached. And I was sitting up in the balcony, and I was little. I don't remember what King said. I thought, again, I'm always thinking everybody's Jesus, because the King was coming, the King was coming. That's all I remember. And but the electricity of that moment, he was coming off of the bus boycott, I believe, back in the, I'm going to say that's what it was. The electricity of that moment was stunning and stayed with me all my life. Looking back on that moment, that was when he went out into the world and was teaching churches about the power of agape love. And it was love that was not just romance and love that was not just brotherhood, but love that could change the world. And I will never forget that moment and how it changed me, even though I had no idea what he was talking about. And I think that idea of love as a force of change has always stayed with me. And that not only as Christians, you know, he was talking to porters and bellboys and maids and people who'd always been on the back of the bus, and said that love can catapult you to change. And that's always been kind of in my belly, that love could change things. And then you work with an organization or a group of people like this 50, 60 years later, and you see it does that. That's what motivates me. I'm inspired by people who use love as a change agent.
Right back at you.
Okay.
So I was trying to think about sort of facets of love or how we approach love, and I think a big part of love is understanding. I say to my teachers at my school, if you don't love your student, then you don't know your student, right? And you need to get to know them better. You know, Jim, I was going to think you would talk about understanding and the love of understanding, but I also was going to quote from Bryan beforehand. So, Bryan, you talk about when your work about just having to get close to the people you're working with before you can love them, before you can go on and win your cases and do your bit. But Jim, you know, can you talk a little bit about your work in terms of getting close to the people you work with? I agree, it is like going on a tour with Jesus. Anyway.
Yeah, I sure can. And what I'm thinking about is after hearing your stories, you two, that I sort of grew up in a relatively poor but really happy, loving family with no boundaries. The only thing I remember was that my grandfather, who was an Irish immigrant, was the caddy at the country club. I grew up in Newport, Rhode Island. And he was a caddy at the country club and became the pro at the country club. And when I was a kid, my mom was sick with terrible bipolar disease, and he would take me to the golf course and let me walk around with him and stay in the caddy shack. And the way he made his money was by teaching people and by building clubs or making clubs. And he had I remember I had a set of clubs this big. And I think I was pretty good, although that was the last time I ever played golf. But he took me in 1953, he took me to stand outside St. Mary's Church where Jack Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy were getting married. So we stood outside and he was talking about this was, you know, a hope for the future. This was something, and I didn't get what he meant, but he was the pro for 50 years, and he died like in 1958 or something like that. And he was never once allowed in the clubhouse of the thing. And he really felt that. And so I had a completely contorted sense of how discrimination worked. But the other thing was that he was all about love. He used to make us liver. He'd take me home and he'd make liver, which he loved. And thought I would love it too. And so I slowly grew to take it and kind of love it. And then he would take me to church. And then he would, you know, we would go visit the people who were sick. So he taught me a world that was, you know, how to take care of people in your community, even though in his world he was shut completely out. So I think the other thing that Bryan in particular, I was a philosophy major too, okay? And I was a bartender for a long time, okay? So I knew how to make money with philosophy, right? So just want to let you know if you're ever interested. But what I would finish is by saying that I'm stunned as I'm learning all about the power of love now and how to say it and how to phrase it. I'm stunned that I went through medical school. I didn't get to medical school till I was 30, but I remember going through medical school and residency, and I don't think I heard the word love mentioned once. You know, it just isn't part of what we do or think about. Now, I think love was probably happening a lot, but we never talked about it. And then when I got, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, I was conscripted to go do this job in 40 years ago, and I was going to do it for a year. And I'd never been in a shelter. I got there, and I was, I thought I was God's gift to the shelter because I was a trained doctor. I was going to be the first doctor in the shelter. And there were these amazing nurses who were in the clinic at the shelter when I got there. It was Pine Street Inn, for those of you who know Boston. And when I walked in, they were around the periphery of the clinic. Everyone was having their feet soaked. That was how they welcomed people in. They called everybody by their name, Mr. Williams. And it was the first time I realized that someone who's homeless almost never has their name said with any dignity or care. And the nurses, I watched these really crusty people just melt. And then they have their foot soaked. And actually the downside of this was they made me soak feet. I couldn't do any doctoring for 2 months. I had to be an apprentice soaking feet. And that was my getting close to people, okay? It was not exactly what I had envisioned, but it was stunning how the flip of the power structure, so that you're serving someone, you're way away from the personal space. And I'm used to being a stethoscope length away from your most personal space. And it transformed the whole relationship. It was all about, I wasn't trying to cure anybody. I wasn't trying to understand. I was just trying to let them know I was there to be there. And that was probably the lasting and most important lesson that I learned during that time.
Becca, I was going to, definitely. I was going to ask you about sort of love for understanding through understanding as well. Because my sense when I go to Thistle Farms is the level of understanding. And it's also the feeling I get when I walk into Homeboy, is this room, and it's all these gigantic human beings, covered with tattoos, and they're all loving on each other, and they all know each other, and they have a BS meter that's really, really tight, right? And they know each other. But Becca, if you could talk also about sort of how love is expressed through understanding and how you need understanding in order to love each other.
Yes.
Go for it.
So I want to say first is that there's so many people in this room that I love that it makes me tender. And I think that's the first thing that love does is like I'm looking at my sweet sister-in-law and niece and nephew almost niece-in-law, who both work here, and they all showed up, and it's just all so beautiful. And then I look at Kim and Shamika, who are leaders at Thistle Farms and demonstrate love all the time, and they've been nothing but you've been so gracious and amazing. But when I think about understanding love, I just think about how crazy it is that we try to pit love against itself without understanding, and how that diminishes it. That's what I'm thinking about. Like, people want to pit lavish against economical. That's a great example. It happens for all of us in justice work and enterprise work. It's like if you love somebody, you want to give them something lavish, but if you're about justice, you have to do it on the cheap. No, I am dead serious. You can guess how much it costs to build this place, and guess how much it costs to build a shelter down the street. And what I'm learning is that in love, when we don't diminish it in our understanding and pit against each other, we can show that the more lavish we love, when we build cathedrals, shelters like cathedrals, this power happens. And we see the full power and understanding of love in a new way. Mm-hmm. And it is so economical. We can house women in $1 million homes, and it's cheaper than frickin' prison. That's a Southern expression, by the way. That's not a bad word. And, or like we want to say, like, that we have to either have this non-competitiveness, or we have to have this idea that you and I, one of us is going to get bigger than the other one. In love, it's just not like that. It grows exponentially and washes everybody. And it's like when we see each other and love each other and not pit things and diminish it, it is so, it's still sad sometimes to me. It's still tender. At Thistle Farms we say, and I think everybody's proved it, nobody gets to the circle at Thistle Farms because it went really well. Yeah. We didn't get there because it went really well. We've had, all of us probably these deaths when we were little kids and abuse and all these things that happened in our lives. but there was love and there was community. And the closer we got to that and our understanding maybe deepened a little bit, that we began to feel the power of it. And it's like, no, love is not going to be relinquished to a spiritual idea or interpersonal relationship. This is ahimsa. It is the sole force of the universe that drives economics and politics and protests and praise and relationships. That's how I feel.
So from love through understanding, I'm going to go to love through mercy. Obviously, Bryan, I'm going to call on you, but I'm going to ask you first, Greg. Bryan talks about how punishment gets votes, right? And talks about, rather than being the stone thrower, be the stone catcher sort of thing. And it's a beautiful metaphor, but I definitely feel at Homeboy that there's love is healing people through a level of mercy. And I wonder if you could respond to that.
Yeah, I love these people here. So and thank you, Brenda and Stefan,
Yes.
for pulling us together. I have a homie who says, he was telling me, I don't really get this forgiveness thing. He said, because with forgiveness, there's too much back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I just like forth. And then he said, fourth is mercy. And I said, well, that's exactly right, So the great discovery in anybody's life is the truth of who you are. And, there's a Tibetan saying that says, wherever you have received the most love, that's your home. And I thought, I don't know about that, because then you're homesick if you're not there. But the discovery is that loving is your home. And once you know that, you'll never be homesick. So then it allows you to be merciful as God is merciful. It allows you, as Tyler was talking about, loving your enemies. It affords you an opportunity not to have enemies, which is kind of, another homie said once, we need to do Jesus one better. And I go, whoa. But yeah, he goes, that's, instead of loving your enemies, how about not having any? So just a brief thing, there was a homie named Robert Mejia who, ran away from home at 9 because, he was being tortured by his parents. And he lived on the streets. And I just can't wrap my heart around the level of pain and the things he had to sustain. And he joined a gang, went to prison. He came to Homeboy, and he found his way on. We had a graffiti removal crew, and I remember him walking into the office after we had this lengthy Christmas break, and I looked at him as he was walking in. I thought, what did he do on Christmas? Because he has nobody. I mean, he's nobody. So I called him in and sat him down. I said, what'd you do for Christmas? Oh, I was just at home. I said, by yourself? Oh, no, I invited 6 guys from the graffiti removal crew, guys like me who had no place to go. And he named them. And they were enemies. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, you're not going to believe it, but I cooked a turkey. I said, wow, that's impressive. How did you prepare it? And he says, well, ghetto style. And I wasn't familiar with that recipe. And he said, well, you rub a gang of butter on it, you put salt and pepper, you squeeze 2 limones. It tasted proper. And I said, wow, I'm doubly impressed. And I said, what else did you have, besides turkey? That's it, just turkey. That's all we had. Yeah, the 7 of us sat in the kitchen staring at the oven, waiting for the turkey to be done. Did I mention that it tasted proper? And I said, yeah, you told me that. And then I remember looking at him and I just thought, this is a miracle. He's remarkable. And so I asked him, how did you get to be like this? We both know his backstory. And he stopped to think and he said, You know, I used to suspect there was something of goodness in here, but I couldn't see it until one day I saw it. Goodness. Ever since that day, I've always known who I was. And now nothing can touch me. And that is the experience of somebody feeling and inhabiting the mercy that is just forth. And knowing the truth of who you are. That's what it looks like when you find your true self in loving. And that's where the joy is. And that's why people are drawn to it. And that's why we say with great confidence, love never fails. And if we're cynical and we think, oh, it's failed a bunch of times. No, we've never tried it fully. And it's like, you know, if you think it's failed, then you want to increase the dosage, you know, and then watch what happens. But we've never fully embraced, you know, a world where we could imagine not only loving our enemies, but not having any, and not just back and forth, but just forth. And that's who God is just forth, just mercy, just mercy.
Just mercy, right? Richard Rohr, where are you? Richard Rohr, where are you? Where is he? Oh, hey. So you've written that the system, whatever that is, like runs on fear, right? And Bryan, you've recognized the fear sometimes in the, I'm looking for a word other than correctional, right? Because that's not the right word, but those folks. And I have to say, when you write about that, it kind of breaks my heart, right? Because you have every reason to just hate those people, right? And yet, you know, you extend mercy to them as well. And you're like, Richard, like this, we're not going to have this system that runs on fear. But softball question, you want to talk about love through mercy?
Well, I think fear is a relevant term if we're going to talk about love and mercy, because what happens when a society allows itself to be governed by fear and anger is we start tolerating things we should never tolerate. We start accepting things we should never accept. And I'm worried, to be very honest, about where we are in the world right now, because I see the politics of fear and anger raging all over the globe and even in this country. And that worries me, because I know that the worst moments in human history have been the moments that we've given in to fear and anger. The Holocaust that took place in Europe was a consequence of governance through fear and anger directed at people who were hated. The Rwandan genocide is a consequence of fear and anger, and that has shaped our policies in this country. We had politicians for decades who would debate punishments as if they could put crimes in prison. And when you hear them talk, they're talking as if they have the ability to put a crime in prison. I hate that crime of burglary, 20 years, and that crime I hate, 50 years, 80 years. And they're talking as if they have the power to put a crime in prison. But of course, we can't put crimes in prison. We can only put people in prison, and people are not crimes. They can commit crimes, and we could want to hold them accountable for crimes, but they're not crimes. And when we stop and reflect on the fact that people are more than crimes, then we realize that fear and anger is not a way to move forward. That's when we start thinking about mercy. I believe that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I think if someone tells a lie, they're not just a liar. I think if someone takes something, they're not just a thief. I think even if someone kills someone, they're not just a killer. And I believe that not only because that's what working with the condemned has taught me. I've stood next to people who've been condemned to death. They've been told that they're so beyond hope, beyond redemption, beyond purpose, that the society is going to kill them. I've stood next to children who've been told that they are only fit to die in prison. Even coming in here, this beautiful young man walked up to me and said, "Hey, I'm one of your juvenile lifers." And I saw him and I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He was, "I'm a student here." And no one ever thought he was fit for anything other to die in prison. And when you're in a community like that, you begin to realize that mercy has a way of redeeming things that other people are just too afraid to see, too angry to see. I've stood next to condemned people. I've stood next to children who've been told they should die in prison. And what I've experienced through that is the power of love to create compassion and mercy and something beautiful. And so I think we have to love mercy because I believe it's the antidote to the politics of fear and anger. It's what gets us past the fear and anger that will cause us to hurt one another and hate one another and push against one another. It is the moment I think we need to embrace right now when so much fear and anger is dominating our political discourse and the way we're talking about institutions and people. And so we should love mercy because it will lift us past the things we're afraid of, the things that make us angry, and get us to something better. And the last thing I'll say about that, I'm so preoccupied right now with the legacy of slavery because I feel like we've never dealt honestly with that institution. And when you think about the 4 million people who were emancipated after the Civil War, they could have chosen revenge and retribution against the people who enslaved them, the people who sold their children away. It would have been natural for them to say, we want to hurt them back for all the things they hurt us. But they instead chose community, fellowship, citizenship. They chose America. And we've never honored that choice. And that's what makes me frustrated and angry in this moment, because I believe that memory is the justice we owe the 10 million black people who were enslaved in this country and experienced the immense suffering and the constant sorrow that that institution created. And when we want to censor history, when we want to restrict what we know and understand about that institution, when we try to limit what people should know, that institution that for 246 years really soaked our country in very unhealthy things, we're not just being dishonest, we're actually being unjust. And I believe that if we are called to do justice, as God requires, if we are called to love mercy, as the prophet Micah says, if we're going to walk humbly, then we have to engage in a loving way with this history to get past the fear and anger that are causing some people to take that down and don't talk about that and to ban this and to ban that. So yes, I think loving mercy is not only something we should embrace, I think it's an answer. I think it's a path. I think it's a way forward in a moment of darkness and confusion and despair and bitterness and hatred. And that's why I think we have to embrace it.
Bryan, I'm not going to remember the exact situation, but you're visiting someone in Alabama, and you don't know what you can do to help. You're fresh out of law school, you're drying your little hoopty around and whatever, and the person says, you can just keep coming back. You know, and Bob, I think about like how you have kept coming back to these conflict areas of the world, you know, Afghanistan or Palestine, right? Or, you know, Bob took a bunch of us to Uganda, where he's beloved and he's kept coming back and can get us all in the VIP lounge at the Uganda airport somehow, right? But I would love it if you would talk about like how, you know, your commitment to love means that you have to keep coming back. You have to sustain that. I mean, everyone in this group has done that, right? Their love has kept them coming back. But I wonder if you could say something about that.
Yeah, I think about the word adjacency. So I went to law school. I didn't go here. I tried. They had a good laugh too. But I met Sweet Maria Goff, and I was a busy guy. And when I met her, I had all the time in the world. We make time for the things that we love. And then if we get adjacent to the things that we love, the things that we've made time for, and so people that say, you know, love your neighbor, can we get adjacent to our neighbors to actually love them, know them. Some people have asked about this stupid Red Sox hat. I'm not a Red Sox fan. I've never gone to a Red Sox game, but my neighbor Carol was a huge Red Sox fan. And she had cancer, and we knew she was going to be in heaven by the end of the week. And so we made a deal. I said, I will wear your Red Sox hat for the rest of my life and represent the Sox here on earth. But in exchange, every time Jesus walks by, you need to mention my name. You guys, it's been 12 years I've been wearing this hat and being completely misunderstood. And that's the thing about loving people well, is that you're going to be completely misunderstood. That's just going to happen constantly. And so if you're willing to get adjacent to the things that you love, being willing to risk being misunderstood, and then to, like, instead of agreeing with Jesus, if faith guides your steps, but to actually participate. I teach at Pepperdine Law School, but also at San Quentin Penitentiary. And we went up with this group of guys that are in the class to the highest point in San Quentin. And there's a guy that has all these tattoos. He's like Moana. Like, the tattoos have tattoos. And we walk out on this balcony, and he starts weeping, like just sobbing. And he's a pretty rugged guy. I'm like, buddy, are you okay? And he said, you know what? I've been incarcerated here for 25 years. I've seen the seagulls every morning. I've smelled the salt air. I've heard the ferries going by. I've never seen the water. And I think that's what love does. It shows people the water. And I think that's what we do. We show people. We don't just talk about love, but that example of doing it. And every selfless act of love is like a declaration of faith. It's like, this is what I actually believe to be true. And so we learn that just one step at a time, but it comes in the form of hospitality. I get around you, I get around friends here in this audience and people who are better at this than me. And I just think, like, that's what we want to do. Because I wear a baseball hat, somebody invited me to throw the first pitch at the Padres game. We evidently have a major league team in San Diego. Who would know? And a part of this first pitch thing was me getting the ball, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to give it to my son to throw the first pitch. And because it wouldn't mean anything to me, but it would mean a whole lot to him. And so he got on the mound and he three-hopped it to the plate, but I thought he was throwing all strikes from what I could see. And what I didn't realize is that they gave us a great big room behind home plate. And it was loaded with food, probably for 60 people. And it was just me and Sweet Maria and our 3 kids. And so we went up into the nosebleed section. We met people. We said, you guys, I know this sounds so creepy, like, come and see my etchings. But we've got this place. It's filled with food. It's right behind home plate. And what I want you to do is follow me down and just stand in the doorway and look inside, and you decide if it's a safe place. And if you think it's safe, you enter in. And the first people came down and they looked and they saw it was a feast and they entered in. And we went into the bleachers and got more people and more people. And we said, just stand at the door and look inside and see if it seems like a safe place. And that's what I want our churches to be. I want them to be safe places. We don't need bouncers, we need ushers. And so, like, that whole idea that we don't want to say everybody's welcome, but then have people not feel welcome when they arrive. And so I think that idea of showing people the water, letting people experience, know why you're doing what you're doing, being ready to be totally misunderstood constantly. I mean, that's just Tuesday for me. And then there's Wednesday and Thursday, and then a long weekend, and it happens all again. But being willing to be misunderstood, that's the idea, the resiliency to continue to try, and to fail trying, don't fail watching. And I think if we get that right, we're on our way.
water. You know, we're swimming in all this love. Where's the love, right? If any of these people have a heart, they all want to have a little piece of what all of us enjoy. I mean, they probably have it in their life in their own way. But I was thinking about how do we move forward in love? How do we grow that muscle, right? And I was going to pitch this question to you, Greg, about the spiritual practice, you know. And one of the things I know in everyone here is that it's actually what, again, Richard, Rory, you talk about having, you know you're on the right path when you actually have more questions than you have answers, right? And that still small voice that keeps asking us, that keeps us curious, you know? You and I once talked about evil, and you said, you know, we don't do that because we don't want to shut the conversation down. We want to know. We want to have more questions. And I wonder if you could offer all of us just some reflections on how we cultivate and hear that still small voice that really is that voice of love that's calling us.
Well, you mentioned Richard. You know, he was talking yesterday about the movement from the Ten Commandments, which is survival, to the Beatitudes. 10 Commandments, 8 Beatitudes, which is flourishing, which is, again, what Tyler was talking about at the very beginning. And so how do we move to this place of flourishing? And so it's kind of a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. And so you find your flourishing in this community, and then you try to stay anchored, putting first things recognizably first and living as though the truth were true. And that's our practice. Our practice is to return to our own kind of breathing and to cherish with every breath. Otherwise, we think we're in a once and for all moment where I've made my decision to love, and that should pretty much settle it. And it doesn't, because you have to remember. You have to remind yourself to remember. Cherishing is not hard. Remembering to cherish is really quite difficult. And I remember I was walking in New York City, and there were 2 construction guys there. And early morning, I was doing an early morning walk, and one guy was trying to convince the other guy of a certain coffee he drank. And he says very distinctly, freshly grounded Turkish coffee. And I'm walking past, and in case anybody hadn't heard it, he says it again, freshly grounded Turkish coffee. And a mantra was born. You know, I was walking in the streets of New York, and I just was breathing in and breathing out, freshly grounded. How do we stay freshly grounded in a place that you can return to all the time? Because to live mercy, and so that it elevates us above fear and anger, really requires of us that we stay anchored and planted. I asked a homie once, how do you pray? And he thought for a second. He goes, sometimes I just sit there and I say, hold me. And then he looked at me and he said, because we're not very good at holding ourselves, which of course is true. So how do we keep ourselves aligned with the tender glance so that we can be that tender glance in the world? How can we choose to notice the notice of God so that's exactly who we are, the notice of God in the world? I remember I was at San Fernando Juvenile Hall. I was doing Mass, and the homies were coming up, and they were doing the readings, and 300 gang members in this gym at a detention facility. And I would close my eyes, and I had the little sheet that had the readings in it, in English and in Spanish. And this homie got up to do the responsorial psalm. There was an overabundance of confidence in his voice, and he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I looked at the sheet, what the hell? And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking, wow, that's way better. So how do we anchor ourselves in the generosity of this exhausted God who's so extensive, not judgmental, not wrathful, not exacting, not disappointed, too busy being generously loving. And how do we find in our world, in our life, and in our proximity, in our adjacency, how do we find, God presencing God's self to us all the time? And then you discover that it's an exhausted God. And what's the praise that this exhausted God is interested in? And it's only in creating a community of kinship such that this God might recognize it.
Becca, I was going to ask you to answer the same question about how do you cultivate that still small voice, but when Father Greg was talking about being grounded, Becca usually preaches barefoot, and is always, and it's super grounded, And I think also with your sense of spirituality and the oils and things like that, I was thinking about your talk about with Can We Talk? Mm-hmm. How you guys create a different kind of silence. It's not a threatening silence. It's not a dangerous, anxiety-filled silence. It's a different kind of silence of love and stuff like that. But I wonder if you could talk also about like how all of us can cultivate that attention to that voice.
For me, the best word that I can use is curiosity. That for all of us, like what still makes you curious beyond probably our collective anger or whatever the collective mercy, collective all that. It's like so many times just curiosity has saved Thistle Farms. And I would be remiss if I didn't say buy Thistle Farms product, so I've said that. Did y'all hear me? Buy Thistle Farms products, don't be mean. But for me, it's curiosity, and my best example is I got invited to go to Toronto to preach to an entire, like a lot of people, Baptist preachers, to be the preacher at this homiletics conference or something in Toronto. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I think these are the guys that don't like women preachers. So then I got a little panicked, and I was walking towards the avenue, and all of a sudden I was like, I can't remember what I believe. I've lost my faith. That is generally kind of like a little bit startling, but if you're getting ready to go preach to a room full of Baptist preachers, it's particularly troublesome.
And you're a priest, by the way.
Oh, I am a priest, by the way. I'm an Episcopal priest that preaches barefoot. That's what made me think of it. About 2 seconds later, this huge black Toronto squirrel crosses my path. I had never seen a squirrel fluffier or more beautiful in my entire life. We have ugly gray-brown squirrels in the South. And the very first thought that flashed through my mind was like, I could wear that. And by the way, I'm a vegetarian. I'm not proud of that thought. But then I was like, no, I'll take a picture of it. I have 3 sons. We'll take a picture and show it to the kids. They're going to love this squirrel. And then, of course, the squirrel didn't hold still for the portrait, so I chased the squirrel down Toronto streets. Ended up in a cemetery right outside of where I was going to preach. And I looked around, and it's like this, a memory of those who gave their lives for love, for joy. There were headstones all around me singing people's praises, remembering the sweetest things about their life. And I was like, whew, I don't have to have faith. Faith has me. I don't have to worry about any of that. If I can just be curious enough to get out of my own head, out of my own self, and love whatever person, squirrel, is drawing me in, I can find a way out.
I was thinking about spiritual disciplines, and we're going to go to you, Jim, about, there you are, Harvard Medical School, you're going to be the big oncologist at Sloan Kettering, right? And then you're you have these nurses who completely kick your butt and, tell you to wash feet and stuff like that. Richard Rohr again talks about like wiping the mirror clean. And what I know of you, it sounds like that's something you've done and done again, is like to see yourself and to see the world, But what I wanted to ask you was just sort of how do you listen to that still small voice again, that same question of like, as you're trying to love more, right? I don't know, you're talking to an unhoused person or potential patient and they're being super annoying or, whatever it is. And how do you listen to that, that voice that's calling you to love,
Frequently I go into bartender mode, okay? Just so, you know how when you're stuck, I don't know if any of you are bartenders, but I did this for years.
You ask them what they're drinking or what
No, you're stuck behind the bar. And they're drinking whatever they're asking, but they start talking and they can be very super annoying, right? And you realize my shift is going to take forever unless I can listen to this and figure out what's going on, right? So I have a feeling that was the best training I had for the job that I got dumped into. But I think the way I would answer that is give you when I started doing this, it was the nurses telling us one thing, but we had a bunch of told us how we had to do our work. And their primary thing was that they didn't want any charity, they wanted social justice, and they wanted continuity of care, they wanted accompaniment, they wanted people who were going to stick with them. And here I am, this sort of overly egotistical doctor, only going to do this as a good work for a year. They hated that. And I mentioned this. They hated it because they said, you mean you're gonna come and get to know us and be with us and then just up and go do your job somewhere else after a year? And that haunted me for the entire year. And it was also the year in which the AIDS epidemic hit the population. We had TB. So people were really sick and they were dying. And I was feeling on one hand, frustrated, this is hopeless and I don't know what to do, it's just chaos. And on the other hand, I was stuck, I was really into the lives of the people that were going through all this. And I think if I'm thinking of the mirror, I think what happens, and I think it's happened to all of us, and I'm sure happens to you, is that somewhere along the way you start to realize that I'm in this to rescue myself, not to help anybody else. And that I had stumbled into exactly the group of people that were just showing me who I was and calling you out to do something that I wasn't. We never would mention the word love, that's what I think. But as I look back now, that's what it was. You were learning to love people whose lives were way different than mine, but who became really close friends. And I couldn't cure their homelessness, I couldn't change the world, but I could make sure they had the best care possible. And I think that then became our way to do it. So I often worry with love, you can't expect to change the world, at least not overnight, but you can expect to change your life and their lives in big and major ways. And the ripple effect of that, I think, is what goes on. I'm saying all this because we were going to dinner the other night at Stefan and Brenda's, and I was walking with my wife and we were on Charles Street, right where the Starbucks is, the corner of Charles and Beacon Street. And there was this guy sitting on the thing asking for money, and he jumped up when he saw Jill, who's my wife, who used to be a physician assistant with, and we've been caring for this guy for 40 years, right? And he jumps up and he gives Jill a big hug, and then he gives me a big hug, and I'm realizing, I was at the time distracted by executive orders and what's going to happen, and it was exactly what I felt my life had been blessed by. And say no more, that's what we realize it's all about. Thank you.
I think when you encounter love, it's sort of naturally inspiring. Bryan, you can go anywhere you want with this, but I was thinking about that story of the Richardsons with Charlie. And if you read Just Mercy, you know the story I'm talking about. But when I read that, I'm like, I want to be those people in my own way. I'm not going to be the same, But I wondered if you could tell people about that, or something else if you want. But
well, I think what comes to mind, particularly after hearing. I'm so wonderful to be on a stage with so many fantastic storytellers. What comes to mind to me does echo back to your first question, which is the importance of getting close to people who struggle, close to people who fall down. I think it's so easy in this country to separate yourself from the problems of other people. We all, in this room, most of us have the means to create distance between where we are and where the poor are and where people who are marginalized are and where people who are disfavored are. People who are in jails and prisons are literally locked away from us. And the power of proximity, in my view, is this, we learn things, we hear things, we see things, but we also understand things that we don't understand until we get proximate. And we don't get proximate just to help other people, we get proximate for ourselves, which is the beauty of what I hear when I hear Jim talk about that. And I think in that regard, it is important to understand the habit of proximity, the power of proximity, and how we can give it to other people. My clients have given it to me, and I think that may be what you're referring to. But what really comes to mind is, again, my grandmother. As I said, I started my education in a colored school. The schools were not integrated. The county was 80% white, 20% black. If you had a vote on whether kids like Bryan Stevenson could go to the public school, we would have lost the vote. Lawyers came in and enforced the rule of law by insisting that the court, that community respond to Brown versus Board of Education. Because those lawyers got proximate to poor black kids like me, I was going to go to the public schools. My grandmother had never lived through integration, and she was very worried about me. And she started doing this thing she had never done before until that point, where she would come up to me and she'd give me these hugs, and she would squeeze me so tightly, I actually thought she was trying to hurt me. And then she'd see me an hour later and she'd say, "Bryan, do you still feel me hugging you?" And if I said no, she would jump on me again. And so by the time I was 9 or 10, she had taught me, every time I saw her, the first thing I would always say is, "Mama, I'll always feel you hugging me." And she, as I said, lived into her 90s. She worked as a domestic. She fell down one day, she broke her hip, and then she was diagnosed with cancer, and she was dying. And I was a college student at the time, and I went to go see her, and I just couldn't imagine being in the world without my grandmother. She was the matriarch in our family. She was the source of power and everything. And I went in there and her eyes were closed, she wasn't responding, and I decided that she couldn't die if I was talking to her. So I sat down and I was prepared to talk forever. And I started telling her everything I was thinking about, everything I was feeling, everything I was doing. I was going on and on and on. And finally, one of my relatives came in and said, "Bryan, you can't stay in here and talk forever. You need to say goodbye." And I just didn't have the heart for it. And I stood up and I was trying to leave. And that's when my grandmother opened her eyes. She reached out and she grabbed my hand and she looked at me. And the last thing she said to me, she said, "Bryan, do you still feel me hugging you?" And then she said, "I want you to know I'm always going to be hugging you." And I have felt the embrace of my grandmother throughout my life. And the power of love and proximity, the power of what I think everybody on this stage is talking about, is that we all have the ability to get close to someone who's fallen down, someone who's lost their way, someone who's struggling, someone who is dealing with things that make them feel like there's no hope. We all have that power, and if we get close to them, if nothing else, we can wrap our arms around them and affirm their humanity and affirm their dignity. You don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a priest. You don't have to be educated. You don't have to be knowledgeable. You just have to have a heart big enough to share with people who are falling down, and we can all embrace somebody. And for me, that's the power that I've been given by my clients, by the people I get to work with. They've taught me how to hug them, and they have hugged me back, and that has taught me a better way to love. And I do feel like the embraces that we share have a power that is almost eternal. It goes on even past we're physically present. And that's what comes to mind when I think about the privilege I've had of standing with the poor and the condemned.
Bob, you and I share a common Christian tradition, and Bryan was talking about standing where you need to stand. When you think about where you need to stand and where love does, which is the best, as good a two-word, up there with love heals. But the two-word sermons is that fantastic. But where do you feel like you need to be standing in your life?
Yeah, I'll just I echo what Bryan said about good storytelling. And that, it just reminds us of who we are, because you hear Bryan's story and then you insert someone who loved you well. So in answer to your question, I'd find people who are moving in the direction of love. I came here 34 years ago with Sweet Maria. We'd been married just a couple years at the time. And at that time, I had only come here one time before to Boston, and I'd landed in New York, and I decided I was going to hitchhike all around New England, which in the late 70s wasn't such a bad idea. I mean, it was a bad idea, but not a super bad idea. And so I put my thumb out, and the first car pulled over, and he said, "Where are you going to?" And I told him, and he said, "That's where I'm going to." And I'm like, lucky for me. And so I jumped in the car. You guys see, this is where the music changes. And so we went for a while in that direction, and then we turned left and went off the highway quite a ways. And it turns out he had other mischief in mind. There was a cornfield, and I jumped out of the car at the first time he slowed down and ran into the cornfield, spent the night sleeping in that cornfield. And the next day I started walking back towards where the highway was. And the next time a car pulled over to pick me up at that highway, I started asking, where are you going? So I wouldn't say where I'm going, because I've experienced what that was like. And so asking people where they are going, and then sizing up, are they moving in a direction you want to move, right? And so I had a couple successful stints on the highway, and I got stuck one place. And I had a Young Life shirt in my backpack. And when I was stuck and nobody would pick me up because I was looking a little afraid, I put my Young Life shirt on, and people will pull over in a second because they're thinking, oh, this is a Young Life kid. We're going to give him a ride. And I think if we carry this banner of love, like we just let people know that we're loving, if we ask them, are you moving in the direction of love? Even if you get in the car with somebody and it turns out wrong, the last thing I'll tell you about this, one car that pulled over, they were going in a direction I wanted to go, and we pulled into a gas station, and they went in and started stealing stuff out of the gas station. And now I'm an accomplice, because I'm inside the car, and they're full of Twinkies and all kinds of stuff. And I learned in that moment, get out of the car. And so in the simplicity of that, find people who are moving in the direction of love. Wear love as your banner, right? And if people aren't going in the direction that you want to do, or they're doing things that are inconsistent with who you are, get out of the car. Yeah, you don't have to have a speech. It's like, just see you later. And I think there's something beautiful about that. If we could act with equal parts love and resolve. I see Becca doing that all the time. I see Father Greg doing that with all the time. I see people living with both love and resolve. And they're not trying to build consensus, they're trying to build a kingdom. And those are two very different things.
I was thinking about trying to build the kingdom, and I was thinking about the space that you create in Can We Talk, and how I know stories of folks who've sat on the margins for the longest time and haven't talked, but you've created a space for them and let them come in to that space. And I wondered if you could explain a little bit about Can We Talk, but also the space and what you're trying to guide people into or welcome them alongside you into. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. At Can We Talk, we try to give people a safe space to speak, to tell their truth without judgment, without any response, just to tell truth. But before you get there...
But you have to fix their problems.
No fixing. Before you get there, and this is the practice that I try to really do every day now, because this is something new for me. I hate to say that. I've been a preacher a long time, and I'm still struggling with this. before you can listen to people, it's how you see people. Because Jesus looked out on the people and he looked out with compassion. And we see each other. We are so afraid of each other now, right? I remember a time in Roxbury where I preach. I walked out of a Bible study and a young man came up to me. He was coming slowly down the street. He had a hood. It's my neighborhood. He's black, I'm black. And I'm thinking, where am I going to run? How am I going to get out of here? Because he looks like suspicious, right? And I promise you this is the truth. This young man came up to me, said, "Are you the preacher here?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Will you pray for me?" And that was the truth. That happened. And I realized every once in a while, I can get in this pulpit and I can preach about love all day long. If I can't see with love, then I'm missing it. So I go to Florida. I'm afraid of the trucks in Florida because, you know, you see a truck, you know who that is. I'm even afraid of the American flag because of what I think I've seen. I'm afraid in Roxbury, the guy with the hood. So here's my ministry now, and I was telling him this the other day. I say hello to everybody I see, and I try to say it with love. So if I see you on the street, "Hi, how you doing?" Now, half the people think I'm crazy, but that's all right, because as you grow older, you get unfiltered. But think about the idea of just being able to connect to the people you see, whether you know them or not, with love. Jesus looked out with compassion over the crowd. That's how you get there. I'm telling you, that's how you get there, and that's what I'm trying to do. And Can We Talk is about bringing those people in, seeing them as human beings who have the issues just like you have, and then listening to them.
Beautiful. I do the same thing. I shake every kid's hand in the morning, and we're right next to the subway, so people rush into the subway, and I say good morning to everybody, and half of them think I'm completely nuts. But after a couple months, they turn around, you know. I feel like we're getting to the end of the time, and I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts that they want to share, but yeah, maybe I'll ask that first. Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to say that you want to say? How much you love my smile? No? No? Thanks, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
I see you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, Greg talked about that thing about, you know, the pointing to the moon, right? And everyone here, you know, the answer isn't love does, you know, the answer, you know, isn't homeboy, right? We're just pointing to the best we can to the moon, and the moon is the love that we're trying to get to. And those of you who I know in this audience, you know this, and you're a part of this, and I think we're trying to be part of this too. And the invitation is, you know, if you come here, you know, if you come here to this, if you come to love, right, you will love this, right? You will love this, and we will love you back. All right, that's the promise that's there, and there really is nothing real in the world other than love. You know, it's not fear, it's not anger, and I imagine all of you guys, you got your skills, you know how to, you know, solve quadratic equations or, you know, do your organic chemistry or whatever, and we have our skills too, but we all are also trying to become more loving, because at the end of the day, that's really what matters. So can we have just one last round of applause for these amazing people?